Hey there, welcome to the first critique of the line study, the line continuity assignment. And what we're doing is critiquing a selection of work, not all the work that was submitted for the assignment. And the selections were made based on, shall we say, teaching opportunities or learning opportunities on your part. So the assignment was about communicating visually the idea of order and chaos, and order disintegrating into chaos. That was the main purpose, and we did that through line, a variety of line, inscribed line, and implied line. So we're looking at all of those things. If you want to track along in the assignment brief, you can do so. We'll also look at overall presentation, the quality of the presentation, and generally whether the design problem was solved and to what degree it was solved. So if you have questions about the assignment or the critique, feel free to drop them below. So let's get started. Right, so we want to look at the idea of order and chaos and whether they're both represented. So that's the first thing we want to see. And there's a lot of order here in how the lines are arranged, including the negative space between. It's fairly uniform in each of the groups of lines. So we have more negative space here and more negative space here, a lot less here. So the lines themselves are denser and are starting to create tonal areas. The same thing here and the same thing here. The termination of the diagonal lines into this line does not constitute a shape, and neither does the termination of these lines into this line right here constitute a shape. So there are no shapes being used, so this is all line. The shapes are implied because of the implied line boundaries. So implied line is being used very well here. And inscribed line, there's a wide variety of line qualities. There's curved, there's straight, there's thick, there's thin, there's density, there is lack of density. There's change of direction. So we have that going well. Order is very obvious in the relationships of the lines within each of the groups of lines. Order itself is a little bit lacking in terms of balance and things like that within the overall design, but we haven't talked about that yet, so we're not going to address that, but just giving you a heads up for future assignments. Chaos, this is probably the most chaotic area. It's the most random. It has the least amount of order and precision going on. So hopefully what you did before you started this assignment was you went to the dictionary and you looked up order and you looked up chaos and maybe you looked up disorder and you got the definitions for those. And definitions are important because then we know what we're talking about. We have things defined. It brings everybody onto the same page. So definitions are pretty standard across different dictionaries. And while definitions can change over time, the whole thing is that there is an agreement and a common ground in what order is in terms of expectation and precision, and what chaos is in being the exact opposite of that, an extreme state of disorder. So that's what we want to see. We want to see that contrast between precise and totally lacking precision. That would be chaotic. The difference between a well-organized drawer in your desk versus a highly disorganized junk drawer. A box of thin spaghetti where everything is the same width or circumference and length, and they're all going the same direction in the box, but after you cook it, it's a chaotic mass of wet pasta, but tasty. So order and disorder are direct opposites. They're polar opposites. And so what we want to do then is create that contrast visually in order to communicate this is order, this is chaos. Then we had to merge the two so that we created movement from one side of the design to the other, so that there's an implied linear movement of the viewer's eye across the design, or going diagonally, or going from the center outward. That movement can happen in any direction and in any way as long as that movement occurred. So here in this design, we don't have that movement. We don't have that area where there is order and that area where there's chaos, and then a movement, a disintegration, a gradual disintegration of order into chaos. We're going from an area of chaos into an area of great precision. So that's what's lacking. This does not solve the primary problem, which was to communicate order and chaos. Why is this the first assignment I give students in the Elements and Principles of Two-Dimensional Design class? Because design is about order. Design is bringing order to chaotic situations. It is solving problems. It's meeting people's needs. When people's needs aren't met, things get chaotic for them. Things get stressful. So as designers, we bring order. We create things that solve people's problems. So this is missing the mark then in terms of that order-chaos solution. It is hitting the mark really well in terms of the implied line, the use of line, the exploration of line, but that wasn't the problem to solve. That was the means by which we're solving the problem, but that in itself wasn't the problem. And here we have to make that differentiation. So you can start to see how thinking like a designer is different. Thinking like a designer is, what's the problem? How do I solve the problem? Let's look at another. So this one has some nice things going on with it. There's a wide variety of line quality and character, which makes it really interesting. One of the things I noted in my critique, in the written critique that I provided, is that there's almost a graffiti sense here on the periphery, and that's kind of a nice quality. And there seems to be a bit of a gradation into that. It has a sense of belonging. There's a lot of movement. The movement is from the center out. There's a lot of chaos and randomness and disorder to things. The order itself isn't fully realized. We kind of miss it. It's here in the middle, right in this little grouping where we've got they're not really horizontal, but the parallel lines going one direction, and then the parallel lines going the opposite direction of that. So right in here, actually in this little area right here, we have order, but it could be a lot more precise so that it creates a greater contrast with the tangled, busy, high energy lines out here. So when we have order, things are a little more passive. When we have disorder, things get very noisy and high energy. This is really strong on the movement, moving out toward the chaos. So there is a good gradation, a disintegration of the order into chaos, but the order needs to be a lot more firmly established. This isn't truly orderly right in here. So again, when you are using contrast, and we talk about contrast pretty much throughout the entire course, contrast is useful in design for focus, for hierarchy, to communicate, and all design communicates. Whether it's industrial design, it's product design, it's packaging, it's graphic, it's web, it's interior design and architecture, it communicates. Let's look at another. So here we have very well done sense of order. The space in between is precise. There is a strong implied line, very precise. It's very straight. It's not wobbling by any means. goes to the center, then we get chaos. So there's a really nice, pretty extreme contrast between the chaos and the order. There's no curved lines here. And the line weights over here are not varied to a high degree. We have thin lines and thick lines. But other than the weight of the line character is pretty much all the same. The lines crisscross, but they do not close into shapes. So remember, we cannot use shape in this. We also cannot use point. We can only use line. So remember that the basic elements, the formal elements, the form elements start with point, which is a position. It's an indicator of a position in space. Then you have a point here and a point here. You've created a line, and you've created movement automatically by starting that line at one point and moving to the end point. You can't have line without a sense of movement. Right here in the middle, we have a point. And here we have a point, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. So we have two types of elements, two different elements when only one was required. And that doesn't mean you can throw in the other one. You were constricted to only one. You could only use line in this design. That helps make you much more aware of line as one of the basic and most expressive formal elements. And you'll start seeing line everywhere, by the way, if you haven't already. So we have illegal, if you will, uses of the point. And they do add interest, but they don't help solve the problem. First, solve the problem. So other than using the points and the fact that there's really no transition between the two ideas of order and chaos, they are sitting side by side. They're not blended. There is not a movement from one to the other in terms of one becoming the other. There's a strong contrast. The contrast is fully realized. But there's not a disintegration of order into chaos. This one is a little more random. It is hand-drawn in quality throughout. It uses a variety of line weights, directions, and does use implied line in terms of the dotted line. So all of this, the broken line here and the dotted lines in here are utilizing smaller lines or shorter lines lined up on a common axis to create the sense of the dotted or the broken line. Dotted lines are in here. So the question is, does this count as a point or a dotted line? Because there's a repetition of the dots in a linear movement, it's a dotted line. So that is our first understanding. It's a dotted line, it's not a series of points. So that's the difference between this piece and this design. So we have order. It's fairly precise. The negative space in between is consistent. The line weights themselves, the direction, the horizontality of the direction is very consistent here. We have an abrupt break right in here. There's very little transitional area. So a gradual disintegration of the order to chaos is not fully realized. It's kind of sudden, and that's not what we were looking for. This line is bothersome because this comes through straight and it integrates comfortably here, but it really sticks out and feels like it doesn't belong over in here because of everything else that's going on. So this kind of downgrades the design in terms of unity. It feels like it doesn't belong in the left third of the design. So here again, we start out with a lot of precision. Order is firmly established. The implied line is very orderly. It is well thought out. We've got a good structure underneath that we can understand by what the composition is doing. Again, we haven't talked about structure yet. We'll get there, but just pointing this out because that's one thing that's making this design work really well. We have a continuation beyond the gutter or the gap on the same axis of each of these vertical lines, and then we start breaking off into these loops and curls. So this is much more random and disorderly than the verticals, and the extreme precision that's going on here and right in here allows us to notice the contrast and the difference in personality between the chaos and the order. Could this be more chaotic? Yes. Could it be more orderly? It has very little room to move into being more orderly. So the order is well established. The chaos could be a little more chaotic. There's still a degree of control to it, but what's going on makes a really nice contrast, and it's a very interesting design. So this ticks all the bells and whistles and solves the problem really well. We do have area of transition. There is this transitions over and this transitions, and there is kind of a zone of transition, and then at the top edge we get the tangle. So it works. And the last one we'll look at. So this uses vertical lines mostly, so we have a strong sense of order in that common direction. This little area over here goes directly opposite. It's going horizontal versus the vertical here and throughout. We have a little bit of chaos in terms of the hook, the curved lines here representing hooks. The implied line does represent some sort of fish. The first read, however, is it's a fish. And because of the hooks, there's an implied person holding a fishing pole somewhere. So this is telling a story. And the first thing we're going to see is the fish with the hooks. It doesn't solve the problem in terms of what it's representing. It's not representing order and chaos. Pretty much it's all orderly. The hooks are much more random. Are they chaotic? The negative space between is controlled, and the movement of the hooks appears to be controlled. There is not an establishment of precision and complete disarray and a disintegration of the one into the other that somehow moves across the space or moves from the center out or from the outside to the center. So while there's some really nice line quality going on and a really obvious use of implied line to imply a figure against a background, it does not solve the problem, and that's the problem. It's solving a different problem. It's an interesting design. It's an illustration. It's not pure surface design. It's not a pattern. And it's communicating something entirely different than what the design brief or the assignment brief required. So it does not solve the problem, therefore it fails on that aspect. This is a question. So we don't know why this margin is here or what this is doing. What is the purpose of this negative space here on the right edge? What relationship does it have to everything else? And this line, this is the single line that is thicker. It has more visual weight than all the other lines. Why is this thicker, and what is this doing here? We'll talk about what's known as the law of simplicity, irreducible complexity. That's a principle in nature and also in design. And also Occam's razor. They're basically three different ways of talking about the same thing. A strong design is simple. It is not complicated. It can be complex, but complicated is not good. Complicated tends toward confusion and disorder. Because design has to communicate, and all design communicates, good design communicates well, confusion means it's not good design. So when we're looking at a design, we're looking at what's going on here and the presence of this darker line that's a separation between this pattern and this negative space, we have to wonder why that's there. It's confusing because there's no answer. It does not make sense. It's not logical. That's another thing about design. Design is not just right brain, it is whole brain. It's like observational drawing. And with apologies to Betty Edwards and the popularity of her drawing from the right side of the brain, drawing requires analysis if you want accuracy. And accuracy needs to come before expression, or else you can't communicate in your drawing. Same thing with design. Design is a whole brain activity. You have to analyze. You have to summarize. You have to observe carefully and understand. You have to study. You have to do research. You have to inquire. You have to be curious. And then you have to edit and curate, which is what curation is. It's basically editing. And you lose everything that's not necessary. You omit it. You take it away because it doesn't help solve the design problem. So the presence of this and this are confusing, and they don't help solve the problem. Even if this weren't talking about fish and fish hooks, they would still not work to solve the problem. So you can see that design is a very different type of discipline than fine art. It is not creative expression, and you can't do just what you want to do simply because you want to do it. You cannot overlay a framework onto a design problem and come up with a solution that doesn't address the problem. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope this brings some things to light. I hope you took notes. Apply what you took away from this critique into your future work. You will improve. You will get better. Thanks for watching.